This sofa is very relaxing. How's it going, guys? You all okay? So I am Emma. Hey. I am Emma. I won a gold medal last year at the Commonwealth, and ever since I've basically tried to strive for diversity in esports. And today we've got a fantastic panel just about that. So you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Lois. I'm also go by Keach, and I'm the community manager for EsportsWales. So most of my time is spent making sure everyone's happy and having a good time. And as a femme-leaning, gender-fluid identifier and an asexual, diversity is like super important to me, and I want everyone in EsportsWales as a server to feel welcome and want to play with everyone.
Hi, I'm Celia. My full title is Dr. Celia Pontin, FRSPH, which is a lot of letters to say that apparently you're supposed to take me seriously. My PhD is in interpreting video game narratives in lieu of their interactivity, but I also work in public health, particularly in relation to video games.
Zombies.
Particularly in relation to video games like loot boxes, in-app purchasing, consumer protection, and things like that.
Hi, my name is John, or Slayer John. I am CEO of EsportsWales. I've been running EsportsWales for about 5 years, and before that I did run a number of Welsh-based communities, Welsh-based gaming communities, for the last probably 10, 12 years, something like that.
Awesome, thank you guys. So let's dive right in, will we, and get to the most important question of the entire panel, and that is, what does inclusivity, let's start that again. What does inclusivity mean to you in the context of esports, and why is it important? Who wants to go first?
Cool. Yeah. So for me, I guess it's how inclusive esports is. I've come from when I got into gaming, as probably a lot of you got into how you got into gaming. You start off playing just sort of some casual games, playing some consoles, getting involved with things. And then you get into sort of more competitive games, you're playing with your friends, you get a bit more competitive, you're playing with your family, and sort of it builds from that. And that's what esports is. And I think one of the great things with esports is that you haven't got that, with traditional sport, you haven't got that physical aspect. And you can have your family members. So you can have you can play with your games with your family, any age group, any levels. There's no sort of gender divide. It's a great way to sort of get people involved and just shows how inclusive it is. And also a lot of people with disabilities as well. Esports is very sort of inclusive from that perspective and just allows people to get together, to play games and enjoy them in a competitive aspect.
I think that one of the things that we consider when we talk about diversity is the inclusion in terms of the makeup of the people in the communities and the teams, and kind of in the wider, I guess, fan base themselves. But I also think that one of the things that's really important when we're talking about diversity within a particular, like, participatory sense is that it's not just that those people are there or that want to be there, it's that they feel comfortable and included being in that space. So I think one of the things that we have at the moment is maybe it's almost a challenge for people to feel comfortable. They're there and they're making their claim and they're coming into the territory, but they're not necessarily at ease there and they're not necessarily feeling welcome there. And I think that's one of the aspects of diversity that's really important. Not just presence, but welcoming.
Yeah, that's as someone who focuses on the community side of esports rather than the beating everyone. Having people feel comfortable and feel welcome is such an important factor to me. But I also think it's like a reflection of the wider world. Like everywhere else in the world, there's such diversity and such variation of people's stories, people's background, people's gender orientation. And esports should reflect that just as much as the world reflects on esports.
I don't know what else I can really add to that. I mean, you have all covered it pretty well. I mean, esports is gaming, right, at the highest level, and games were originally made for people to have fun. There was no barriers put in. There was no nonsense stopping people play games, and I think that's how we need to continue it, is just, if you want to play, you can play. Everyone's welcome. I think that's the most important message, really.
Yeah, I think the title says it all. The esports is for all, and I think throwing back to that is like, just looking around everyone in Insomnia, you can kind of see the different age groups. You can see the sort of different demographics. You can see the appeal here, and what gaming does is bring people together. And it's definitely something which you from an inclusive point of view, where you go to music gigs or you go to sport gigs, you see there's a certain type of people attracted to that. With esports, it seems that there's attraction from everyone, really, and different games attract different ones. There's some massive field and massive genres of games out there.
So, moving on then, what are the barriers that are in place basically to stop people taking part in esports, and what can we really do to overcome these?
So, I guess from EsportsWales perspective, I think the biggest barriers is one. I think the barriers is the misconception, I guess, of the games as not beneficial for people's health, and saying that. People seeing it and saying that, oh, it's just people playing by themselves, in their rooms, and not really getting involved with people. It's a case of, with esports, it's allowing people to connect, it's allowing people to network, it's allowing people to play with each other, and then get a sense of something in common which they can bond over. And I think that's one of the biggest things for it. With EsportsWales as well, I guess it's down to funding, and it's down to getting that message across. Because that message, people see it that way, that when you try to sell esports to people, it's really difficult for them to see it in a perspective that we're trying to sell something which is really inclusive. It's getting people involved, it's getting people connected. And then when we actually show them and go through the classes and the academies, which we've done through EsportsWales, people are turning around going, this is amazing. I'm showing it to MPs and stuff and going, this ticks every box we're trying to achieve, with a creative aspect, with the streaming, with the casting, with social media, with the understanding and connecting with that 16 to 25 demographic. They're like, this is what we've been missing, and we're trying to sell that from an esports perspective. But I think that's one of the big barriers, is getting that message across, and that message to people.
I think I have a different answer to the barriers, not disagreeing different. But before I mention that, I want to say I totally agree about the social aspects. There is that misconception that it's like teenage boys sitting alone in their bedrooms. My husband and I graduated from university in 2010, which makes me feel very old. And we still keep in touch with our university friends, particularly him, by playing esports, right? That's a 13-year kind of continuation of a friendship through Dota 2 and Counter-Strike and stuff. It's a really powerful social tool, and I totally agree. From my perspective, and from a policy perspective, one of the problems with inclusivity and diversity, particularly within formalized team esports, is supply, right? So if you're talking about, say, participation at a higher level, you need the people who can play at that level. And where do you get them? Well, you get them from almost like a teenage pool of people who are playing. And to give you kind of a more structured example, if we take female CEOs, for instance, right? That's a big thing. We need more women to be heading up companies. Well, where do they come from? Because you can't just promote people from nowhere. Right, you need female senior managers, you need middle managers, you need entrants, and then to get those, you need graduates or apprentices or something. You need women in those positions and schoolgirls who are willing to come up to that position. And that stands for every kind of minority group. So some of the barriers actually start at school level, and whether these are interesting things or whether this is just for boys or just for nerds and stuff like that. And I think you need to tackle that in order to make initiatives that are already in place for inclusivity actually work and have more impact, 5-10 years down the line, and to continue growing.
Sorry to come in on that again. but you mentioned something about the barriers and sort of getting that policies across. One of the big things with esports is that it's very new. Like, I don't know how many of you in the audience sort of knew esports or the term esports in the last sort of 5-10 years, or sort of when you knew about it. But in case of the sort of the policies, there's a lot of policies there for sport, but there's hardly any for like esports. So when you would like looking to put like legal stuff in place, or I'm looking to fly people around the world to play for Wales, it's a case of I can't tick a box and say they're playing a sports game or they're playing sports because it's not recognized in the UK as a sport, whereas within sort of some countries it is. It's kind of where you're looking to get that sort of, that legal aspect when you're doing a risk assessment, when you're sort of building those sort of measures in. Esports isn't there yet, so it's getting that into the UK law, into that sort of system, or it's kind of falling into the sports category and then falling into the current legal structure with it, which is in sport.
Yeah, like I do think as someone who played games since like they were like teeny tiny toddler, it was always said to me, it was, oh, that's a tomboy thing. You're a tomboy. That's what boys do. And I think perception itself can affect how people want to do things. So because a lot of girls don't see other girls, playing esports and playing and competing, they sort of go, is there a place for me there? And then like a really great example is G2's Valorant roster. 4 girls, 1 guy. All of a sudden, every girl I know is playing Valorant because they're like, well, I've seen one of the biggest orgs in the world select a team that I could be part of one day. So I do think like perception, like sort of the stigma that gaming's had for quite a while of like, admittedly I did adhere to it. I was a stinky teenager in my basement for a little while and then I moved out. So sort of these perception stigmas that are getting changed on the daily. Like, at Insomnia Con now, you've got all kinds of people here. It's not just what the general public is sold by, like, newspapers and stuff. It's anyone and everyone's kind of here. And it's being able to showcase that and have people see it's more than just one or two types of people. And sort of getting that cycle, kickstarting that cycle of making it not, like, everything is normal. So I guess it's kind of like Syndrome in The Incredibles. If everyone's super, no one's super. But instead it's like, if everyone's gaming, then no one has a problem with it. And it's getting that kick-started for me.
Well, I think something I want to add to that about this perception of games as a boys' thing. Just as many women and girls play games as men and boys, if you include casual mobile gaming. And a lot of people don't consider it to be real gaming. And there are some socio-cultural roots to this, right? Like the original video games were the preserve of teenage boys, right? That's what we have. You know, it's the same kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, cliques. And because of that being like almost like a dismissed and ostracized community in its own right for quite some time, because even that had the negative perceptions of the loser teenagers, right, still living at home. Because of that, there's this kind of almost fight to keep that space as we are the originals, and now gaming is mainstream, and we don't want to share because we spent so long being ostracized and being made fun of for this hobby that other people think is geeky or otherwise not worth their time, that now everyone else is getting involved, that devalues it. And this kind of becomes extra when you layer on that whole thing of, well, girl stuff isn't like real, right? It's not valid, it's not as good. It's the pink and purple and fluffy like overlayer of it. Instead of considering that, you know what, Candy Crush takes reaction time and Candy Crush takes...
More zombies.
I know. The zombies don't like Candy Crush. And my defense of a much derided game. But it takes skill, right? It takes thinking moves ahead. It takes perseverance. It takes being quick. It takes management of your boosters and stuff. I don't play it because I am terrible at those. But it is still very much a video game. And if you had released that in 1987, it would have been popular with everyone who already played them. So I think one of the things that we need to counter is the idea of what counts as a video game and who actually even gets to decide that. Like, that's not for one group of people within the community to decide.
Yeah, I think just to add to that as well. So we took a team out to Bali last year, and we ended up having a player playing in eFootball, which was on a PlayStation. We had our CSGO team playing on a PC, but there was also PUBG Mobile, which is played on phones, and there was also Mobile Legends, which was the biggest viewed game there, which is played on phones as well. So while in the sort of UK, sort of main or serious gamers seem to be either console or PC gamers, across the world, sort of India, Philippines, and things like that, it's a case of mobile phones is the way sort of it's developing and the way esports is developing. So when people say like, oh, it's just a mobile phone game, it's not an esports title, that's sort of, yeah, totally wrong, because it's there's different platforms, but there's a massive audience, there's a massive sort of gaming scene within those games.
You guys are answering all the questions. I don't have to do anything. This is great. Yeah, I think it's just the stigma of what gaming used to be and how it's been unhealthily treated. I think is the main barrier for most people. We just need to change that. Like, for instance, the female leagues don't get as much sort of airtime or sponsorship as the traditional men's leagues. Why is that? Is it because it's seen as a lesser form of entertainment, or what's the reason behind it? Who knows? But I'll tell you, if you do a mixed league where it's half and half, say 3 men, 3 women, 3 marginalized genders, underrepresented communities, whatever you want to have, I guarantee you'll not see the difference in entertainment levels against the standard normalized sort of men's division that's out there now. And that's what we need to work towards, is just showcasing more people and broadcasting more champions and getting more faces in places that are traditionally only ran by men.
Can I get back on my soapbox for a minute? Because you mentioned that mixed teams, right? And you tend to get kind of the men's teams as default, right? Because again, a lot of the things that are esports, a lot of the games that are like the big tournaments and things, they are mainly played by men, and so the original teams were heavily, if not exclusively, male. I remember watching the Dota Internationals this would have been 2016, 2017, and none of the players in those teams were women, right? And that then kind of ends up being, well, that was originally because that was who was playing the games, and then they get to the vast majority, and then, the player base opens up and you have women playing, but because the first teams happened to be all male, you get this sense of well, that's like football, right, or rugby or whatever, that is the game, and then now we need a women's section because we need to be able to play, and we can't because that is the men's side. That's not what it was to begin with. And I think what's really important is to consider that, totally, at the moment we have the men's teams and the women's teams because the women's teams is a great route in, but what we should be looking forward to is the point where, particularly within esports, because you mentioned, it's not that same physical difference as you have with physical sports, working towards the point where mixed teams are just the default. Right? You don't just have diversity amongst the community and amongst the available leagues and the available teams, but within them themselves, because there's no reason not to have that.
100%. I mean, thumbs are thumbs, wrists are wrists. Everyone has them, or something they can use for them.
And if they don't, then there is special effects.
Exactly. There's plenty of accessible controllers, keyboards, mice. There's enough for technology now that we can make pretty much anything so that anyone who wants to play can play, and that's the beauty of it. I think it's also a numbers game, right? It's also because there is so many more men traditionally focused on gaming compared to girls or marginalized genders, that in a sheer numbers basis, it's just harder for women to break through because there's what 10 to every one. That math is not correct. Do not quote me on that, but it's quite a high number.
But I think that part of the numbers game is like I was so earlier I talked about like supply of people from the bottom in, and that's partly it. But also amongst the community, part of it is because of this perception that boys are for games. Games are for boys. I mean, it might be the other way around as well, but that because of that a lot of the community events are heavily weighted towards the male audience. And I remember turning up to Eurogamer when I was in my early 20s and seeing the booth babes, right, dressed in like bikinis and stuff, and thinking, I don't want to be in this space. This isn't for me.
I'll be honest, some dude just walked past in a full bikini, and I was giving him hella props. I was like, well done, sir, well done.
Oh, like, it's one thing when it's cosplay, and you're like, yeah, you're doing this to because that's your choice, and the whole point is you're looking like a character. But when you've got, like, a bunch of women standing around in bikinis to get you to come over to a stand, like, why would I want to be in that situation? Because what does that say about, like, the role of women within that community? So I think that's part of it. I also think things are getting better, like better and better and better. And I've been to, like, some gambling conventions from my public health work where they specifically ban, like, booth babes and stuff like that, which, awesome. Every gaming convention should do that. So I think it's about making sure that you're not indirectly excluding people by doing stuff that actually makes them really uncomfortable in that space.
Yeah, I think sort of from that aspect, I think it's a case of, like, with esports, as I said before, it's quite new. And I think a lot of people have seen it as, right, what we'll do is we'll do what traditional sports have done. We'll replicate the current traditional sport sort of metric, and we'll do the same. So where you said that, it could be like looking at, let's say, like boxing or some of the other sort of other sports which have sort of worked in the past, and they've gone, we'll replicate that as esports. But esports is very different. It's a different audience. It's a different player base, and it's open to everyone, which is kind of what we're saying. So I think it's the industry learning, and it's taking time to adapt to go, this isn't like traditional sport, and we shouldn't run it the same.
I think this is where I get to hop in and say, I do also think it's kind of the standard problem you get with women in careers, where it's, okay, once I get home now, I'm going to cook my fiancé dinner, because that's what I do when I'm home, because I'm the girl of the house, so to say. And a lot of girls that I have spoken to are like, well, I don't get to sit and play League of Legends for 18 hours a day and get the same practice as guys, because I've got other things to do in my life, because people expect that of me. So I think being able to turn to other people who have those constraints and have those expectations and go, no, go do what you want to do. If you want to put that hard of a schedule in and get those hours in, go do it. And I think a lot of people sort of are timid about approaching esports because they look at the amount of time you have to sink into, like, doing your coaching sessions, going to your nutritionist, doing your drafts, looking at your strategies, and they sort of go, that's so much time. I've got all these other things to do. And esports being seen as, like, because it's newer and because it's to do with video games, a lot of people sort of go, oh, but that's not a real job. And it annoys me to no end, because, sitting up here this weekend is my job. My Easter weekend is up here basically working, networking, doing things as a community manager for EsportsWales. So trying to, bettering the community as a whole by getting it recognized as an actual industry will push it forward for everyone. So I think having these structures and having the support there to get kids into it, to get the education sorted so people can see the steps they can take and the support that they have will greatly improve. It'll greatly improve the scene for everyone. Women, LGBT, everyone, really. Woo.
I like it. I think that's a good closing statement for question 2 of like 20. So moving on, let's talk about some safeguarding and how we tackle toxicity. So what are some effective strategies for creating safe spaces within esports and safeguarding people online from harassment, cyberbullying, or other forms of toxic behavior? I'm going to go first for once. Shock. I'm actually going to do some work. I think I'm a big fan. I don't think I am a big fan of that we should be getting coaching in schools, especially in regards to esports. Esports is becoming so mainstream now that it's everywhere. Like, you've so many companies getting involved in esports, so many brands. It's like, esports is just massive now, especially in the UK. And if you start at an early age in schools and teach kids that, look, if you're going to be rude and mean and toxic online, nobody's going to want you in their team and nobody's going to want to play for you, because the toxicity at the minute comes from kids who don't know any better, seeing someone say something online and going, that's funny, I'm going to say that. And then they keep saying it, and they keep saying it, and then their friends say it, and it just snowballs. Whereas if esports is going as big as it has been at a school at a young age, you teach them that the people you're playing against, especially in a school setting, are actually potentially your teammates, and that you shouldn't be toxic to your teammates. And I think getting in early and coaching them and developing that healthy mental routine of, like, just don't be in it like a bad person online, because it will affect your career if you want to have a career. I say bad because I don't want to swear. Stop laughing at me. I think if you instill that in them at a young age, it will cut out a lot of... it's not going to cut out all toxicity, but it will cut out a massive amount of it if they know the subsequent... Is it subsequences? Is that right? I don't know. The consequences of what being toxic online does, and everything is now online anyway, so you have a whole trail of everything you do online stays online. And if you do want to pursue a career in esports or gaming in the general overall industry, companies will now have access to that. So coaching at a young age is my answer to that question.
Yeah, you've basically stolen all my talking points.
That's why I went first.
Dang it. But yeah, like, for me, educational programs are the thing I'm super passionate about. We at EsportsWales have been running the Esports for All program. We recently finished our first ever 6-week workshop. And I do think sort of coaching people from that young age, especially since games are now a huge part of people's childhoods. So having that sort of coaching from a young age of what is acceptable in a space is so important, because the lack of it has led to kind of the storms we've got going on Twitter with Mr. Tate. I didn't want to bring up his name. Yeah, boo. But the lack of education and the lack of structured support and funding for esports is leading to these sort of black spots. And I do think, we need the support to go and to keep the doors open for kids and for youths, and even for people. I'm 26 years old, and I only just started getting into this game because I didn't have it 10 years ago. So I'm a fresh little rabbit on the field, and I'm mostly terrified most of the time, I'll admit. But gaining the experience now, I know I can be way more impactful with the stuff I've been passionate about for years because of the support I'm now getting. So being able to offer that to people even younger than me gives me such strength.
So I can't necessarily answer this from a boots on the ground perspective, because I exist in the lofty world of policy and kind of considering strategies and not being the person on the receiving end of the impact that it makes. But I just want to mention 2 initiatives. The first one, I don't know if you can call it initiative, because it is the government doing some legislation. So the online safety bill, if it is written properly and if it works, and those are big ifs, because it is being written and will be regulated by people who do not play esports. There are a handful of MPs who are relatively in it in terms of video games, but whether that has much influence is a big question mark when it comes to parliamentary stuff. But that could be part of the solution to the problem. because it looks at online spaces and where the line is in terms of legality and the onus on developers and online service providers to give tools and to make that space and to have a responsibility to help make that a safe space for everyone, regardless of the group they belong to, and kind of try and protect them from some of the abuse and the ostracization they might receive. But the other is stuff that people are already doing. So high intensity, particularly for games where children are a lot, like Roblox, like that high intensity auto moderation, like block lists of certain words, like parental permission being required to take part in online chats and things like that, that provides a good foundation for people being used to being online with those games before they are necessarily old enough to engage with some of the like dodgier social aspects of it, and to keep people safe in that way so that they can slowly transition into like the full online experience as they get older. So, you know, there is that potential legislative change that people outside of video games policy will read or not even read, but if they do, they will read it and just go, well, but there are games companies implementing it like as we speak anyway.
Those zombies love you. Every time you speak, the zombies are like, time to go.
I guess from the safeguarding side of things, I think when I go into schools, when I go into colleges, and you speak to the sort of the youngsters of today, if you go back like 15 years ago, they would say they want to be footballers, they want to be the next the next, Ronaldo and stuff like that. But these days you go in and they go, I want to be the next influencer. I want to be a YouTuber when I grow up. And they're going to look to do that. It's a case of how can we make sure they do it in a safe way, and we build those safe spaces for them, and we develop it in each stages. So being on the Discord stage, Discord is one of the great tools and allows you to restrict who's in your Discord. It allows people to give them roles. It allows you to have channels which are 18 plus. There's a lot of sort of safeguarding measures which you're able to put in place. We've got a tournament system we use which is bespoke to EsportsWales, which allows us to make it safe, make it so that if anyone comes in sort of under a certain age, we're able to say, right, you can't compete in these tournaments due to the level of game unless you've got parental consent, or sort of moving forward with that. There's a lot of avenues with the sort of safeguarding, making sure that people within those Discords are safeguard trained, which they can signpost youngsters who come in, how to go into the right things, whether it's sort of mental health charities or other sort of support which they can get, and it's sort of building that in. But you kind of mentioned about going into schools and educating. It's not just educating the youngsters of today, but it's also educating the teachers themselves to sort of, because the youngsters, I guess, are going in and they're going to be on Discord, they're going to be on YouTube, they're going to be looking for this stuff, but it's about making sure they go through it in the right way. So it's more educating the sort of teachers themselves to sort of say, yeah, get them using Discord, but make sure you have a Discord channel for your school, make sure that Discord channel is moderated, make sure there's no one in there which isn't from your school, and if there is, kick them out and have that control, and just making sure it's used in the right way. And I think developing that and having those steps is the best way to sort of allow the youngsters of today to go for their dreams, but just make sure that they do it in a safe way, and we support them in that.
And I think while we're talking about kind of not just educating the young people, I think we also need to talk about parents. I as a parent, and I like that this gives me some legitimacy instead of just being like, it's all the parents' fault. No, I own a small person.
Own a small person?
I own a small person. He was the one screaming mummy at the back when the panel started. And I definitely feel like when it comes to online gaming, and even things like in-game purchasing, right? Like, because that is a safety issue when we think about like financial safety. When it comes to those things, it is not just his teachers, although they do stuff like that at school and it gets built in, absolutely. But it is my job as his parent to understand what he is doing with his spare time, what he is playing, who he is playing with, and the healthy behaviors around that. A lot of that is to do with how you relate to other people. And I think that we need to very much instill in young people the idea that just because you're talking to someone online, that shouldn't mean that you act any differently to if you are talking to somebody in person. And that bringing up somebody to be a polite and nice human being extends not just to the personal sphere, but also to where you are online and who you are talking to. But also, I think there is this kind of gap, although it may well be narrowing now that, you know, millennials are becoming parents and things like that, so people who grew up playing video games are parents. That gap may be narrowing, but there is a gap between what parents know about video games and what their kids are doing. And, you know, you see the stories in, like, the Daily Mail of my kid spent $5,000 on in-game purchases. And you're like, well, why is your card linked to it in a way that doesn't require a password? And if it requires a PIN and your kid has gone round the PIN and has found it and has used it without telling you, mate, that's not the game, right? You need to have a talk with your kid about, like, this is stealing and stuff like that. And I think that because it is video games, there's this sense that, well, it's different from anything else. Well, it isn't. It's media in its own right. It's just like film. It's just like TV. My PhD argued that it's like books and things like that. It is a pop culture thing that everybody engages with. And it is another part of, like, bringing up kids to act safely and responsibly. Speaking as a parent.
Not speaking as a parent. I agree. So we're actually over halfway through our time, and we've got through 3 questions out of 10. So we were panicking for no reason, guys. We have plenty of talking points here. I'm going to start picking questions now. Which does happen to be question 4 out of 3, or out of 4. So, how can we create a more welcoming and inclusive environment for underrepresented groups and communities in esports, such as women, the LGBTQ+ community, and people with disabilities? We have kind of covered most of this, you know, with the accessibility of controllers and then things like that. But can you think of anything else that we could be doing as a community as a whole?
I think from it's having the. I think it's having the right people in the place to showcase it's having the representation to showcase that there are people out there, and then it's to show that there are jobs out there for people to get into esports, and it's not just sort of typecast of this person is the right person for it. So it's giving people the opportunities, like Hitch, to come in and sort of do it from the Women Ambassador, but also it's the side of things of developing more events. We run a women's team for CSGO. Last year we had Dota 2, eFootball, Rocket League, and doing that, and then showcasing the sort of what is the heroes of EsportsWales to come out and say that you could do it as well. It's having those avenues and having those representation and doing that and giving people the voice. Having this sort of Esports for All talk is giving people the voice to kind of go, this is my view of esports. This is why I got into it. This is what I like to do it. And why not join us? Why not, come and play games with us and do that?
I mentioned in what I just said that video games are part of the media landscape, right? They're a form of pop culture. They're something that, like, the majority of people in the UK spend their time doing. Therefore, they are part of the world. Right, that's like a really trite philosophy degree way of saying that they are inextricably linked to the way that we live our daily lives. And so to some extent, therefore, the ways to break down barriers and to encourage an inclusive environment is the same as it is for inclusivity in every single part of our lives. And that is recognizing that women and LGBT people and people from different minority backgrounds, people from different, I was about to say socioeconomic backgrounds, people from varying income levels and backgrounds and educational levels, recognizing that, like, mate, they're people just as much as, like, everyone else, and they have a right to share those spaces and to participate, and that everything that is exclusionary is entirely invented, right? There is no reason that women shouldn't be playing video games, that trans people shouldn't be playing video games, that gay people shouldn't, that black people, that other minority ethnic people shouldn't be playing video games. And yet we have decided that this is a thing, and it is happening, and it is a total invention in the same way that it is in huge swathes of the rest of our lives. I'm afraid that answer is basically like, yeah, everything sucks and we need to change and humans are rubbish.
It is getting better, though.
But also, humans are inherently a little bit rubbish. You can give a less soapboxy answer, probably.
We've actually only got 5 minutes left, and there is one question, but if you want to go ahead.
I kind of feel like we go from like the industry professional to the person who knows all the things to me.
Hey, you're on the pointy end of this,
right? I'm the one who's here to have fun. And it's basically my bread and butter to host and have events that people feel comfortable in. So I run both the LGBT+ and the women's events in EsportsWales. So I have the absolute pleasure of basically being a Denny's host, and I do love it very much. It's one of my favorite things in my life right now. And I think just having these sort of dedicated spaces where it's like, it's okay for you to be you for an hour, because I can say solo queuing League of Legends as a girl can be exhausting. So it's just nice to just pop in and just queue with the girlies and know like they've got my back, and that like, you know, I can just play and be a bit more like loose and be a bit more like, okay, I don't have to pretend I'm a guy and sort of like do these little nods and sort of be like, yeah, you know, yeah, I'm totally, I'm a dude right now, yeah. So it's just nice to just like, you know, skip along Summoner's Rift with a bouquet of flowers and just like slay like queens. It feels good to let my hair down once in a while.
Love it. Well, with that, I mean, we only had 5 minutes left a couple of minutes ago. We kind of drastically overshot. But we do have one question from the Q&A, from Discord. Is there a question from Discord? We're going to get our lovely host back.
I think I'm going to have to speed run this.
Thank you. We've got a lovely question from Discord, and the first one would be, how would younger people get into esports?
How could they get into it? How they can get in?
How would younger people get into esports?
Oh, okay, so the best way to do it depends on the game. So you research the game which you want to play. Depending on that, there'll be different avenues. But it's generally we've got within Wales a pathway, so a player pathway as such. So we'd say if you're starting out, it's playing competitive, getting your rank within the game. If you're playing in a college, have a look, because the British Esports run the British Esports Champs. There's most likely a Rocket League team, Valorant team, Overwatch team, and League of Legends team within your college or school. If there isn't, ask your IT or your teacher, can you set one up? Because they're a great way to get in a competitive access and play in at that level. If you're playing at a university level, the good way to get into it is play in your university society. They'll play in the NSE or the NUL. The NSE is across it by the esports stage, so go and check them out. And the British Esports is around as well, so go and check those guys out as well. Following on from that side, it's after you come out of uni in Wales, I can talk about it. We've got the Welsh Esports League, which allows people to play 8 regionals around Wales, and it's like a bubble league, which moves on then to the sort of next step, which is either professional play and being picked up by a professional team, or being picked up for your nation and playing like Emma did in the Commonwealth. Oh, Emma hasn't got a mic, so I guess those are the kind of the steps which I would recommend someone taking if they wanted to get into esports. I would say that one thing to remember, or one thing to look at, is that it's very tough. So yeah, don't be disheartened, I guess, when you sort of hit a few bumps. There's a lot of people who want to be the best esports players in the world, but there are opportunities out there, and it's not just playing. There's a whole industry around esports to get involved with, as you can see, like you're in Insomnia.
I think that's the important thing as well, is it's not just idiots like me that sit and play video games all the time. If you want to get into esports, there is a vast, vast array of jobs and possibilities available. So find something you love, and that will then be available for you in esports as well. So whether that's nutrition, fitness, community management, business side of things, commercial, graphics design, building tech, literally whatever you can think of, there will be a job and an opportunity for you to pursue that career in esports.
Yeah, there's so much of that. One of my personal favorites that I love thinking about is, I'm an accountant. He flips his glasses off. He puts a pair of shades on for esports. Explosions in the background. Everything's cool now. There's so many jobs that like you see that are regular jobs with like an esports twist. Those are there just as much as like your players, your coaches, your casters.
I am not in an esports team, an esports
I think,
kind of company, anything like that. But I would say that there are a bunch of jobs that are not playing it.
Unfortunately, I think we have to cut you short. I'm really sorry. We do appreciate the very detailed answer to the question, though, and thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about it, because it is something that, me being a female in it, it was good to listen to. So, guys, thank you. A massive round of applause for our lovely guests up here for Esports for All. And Emma, thank you. I appreciate it. We are back after this with the Football Manager show. Slightly different, but yeah, if you guys want to come back, that'll be on just after.